Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, welcoming you to yet another Unsolved Mysteries video. Before we start, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and turn on all notifications. Also, please do me a huge favor, and go down to the comments section, and let me know where you're listening from. This really helps boost my video and expands the reach of my content. And with that said, let's get down to business. On a bright summer day in 1995, 24-year-old Erin Marie Gilbert set out on a first date to the Girdwood Forest Fair in Alaska. She left her sister's Anchorage home around 4 p.m. with a man she had met just days before. No one imagined that would be the last time they'd see her. By the next morning, Erin had vanished without a trace, sparking one of Alaska's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. Erin Gilbert was not the type of person to disappear willingly, according to those who knew her. Originally from Washington State, she was bright, athletic, and full of ambition. Standing nearly 6 feet tall, Erin played multiple sports and excelled in school. In 1994, she moved to Alaska to live with her sister Stephanie's family at Elmendorf Air Force Base. Erin worked as a nanny in Anchorage and planned to attend cosmetology school while nurturing dreams of becoming a writer. On July 1st, 1995, Erin eagerly went on a first date with 33-year-old Dave Combs, whom she'd met at a local bar a few nights earlier. Dave picked her up to drive about 40 miles south to Girdwood, where the annual forest fair was in full swing. The Girdwood Forest Fair was a lively event with food, fun, and fashion, a perfect setting for a casual outing with a new date. Witnesses later recalled seeing Erin and Dave together, including at the fair's beer garden around 6. As evening approached, the couple decided to leave the fair. According to Dave's account, they returned to his car just after 6, only to find it wouldn't start. He said he had accidentally left the headlights on, draining the battery. Stranded, Dave told Erin he would walk to a nearby friend's house to get jumper cables and asked her to wait by the car. He then set off on foot in search of help, leaving Erin alone at the vehicle. Dave later told police that he wandered for up to 2 hours trying to locate his friend's home with no luck. When he finally returned to his car after 8 o'clock that night, Erin was nowhere to be found. Curiously, when he tried the ignition again, the car started immediately without assistance. Dave said he assumed Erin got tired of waiting and walked back to the fairgrounds. He then claimed he drove back to the fair and searched for her among the crowds until about 1 o'clock that morning, with no success. It wasn't until 7 a.m. the next day that Dave contacted Erin's family to ask if she had made it home. That call jolted Erin's sister, Stephanie, who immediately knew something was wrong. There was no way Erin would have stayed out all night without checking in. A quick check of Erin's bedroom confirmed she'd never made it home and her bed hadn't been slept in. Stephanie and her family rushed to Girdwood that morning and had Erin's name announced over the loudspeaker at the fair. They searched the fairgrounds and the surrounding woods, frantically looking for any sign of her, but there was absolutely nothing. Desperate, the family reported Erin missing to the Alaska State Troopers, hoping in vain for immediate help. Once law enforcement got involved, a large-scale search began in and around Girdwood. Alaska State Troopers coordinated extensive ground and air searches using search dogs and helicopters, but no clues were found. Investigators were left with no witnesses, no physical evidence, and no crime scene to explain what happened. It's important to mention that there was a delay in the initial response. When Stephanie first tried to report Erin missing, the cops were hesitant to act immediately since Erin was an adult who hadn't been gone long. Frustrated, Stephanie turned to the media for help. She went to a local TV station to get Erin's photo broadcast, which finally spurred a more urgent police response. By then, though, crucial hours had passed, and any potential trail had gone cold. Throughout the investigation, Dave Combs insisted he had nothing to do with Erin's disappearance and repeated his account of events. He cooperated with police early on, but some of his actions raised suspicions. Notably, Combs refused a polygraph test when it was offered and didn't participate in volunteer search efforts after Erin went missing. Police haven't officially named him a suspect due to lack of evidence, but they also haven't ruled anyone out. In the absence of evidence, several theories have emerged about what might have happened to Erin. To the surprise of perhaps no one leading theory is that foul play by Combs was involved. Leaving a young woman alone beside a disabled car for 2 hours was highly unusual, and many feel the circumstances of that night cast suspicion on Dave. Observers point to the oddities in Dave Combs' story: leaving Erin alone at night, being gone for hours, and the car mysteriously starting on its own. Then, for no reason whatsoever, after he assumed that she found another way home, he began to look for her at the fair until 1 that morning. I mean, personally, I don't think this story makes a lot of logical sense, and I'm sure a lot of you agree with my take on that. It also seems concerning that he waited until the next morning to alert anyone. The lack of cooperation later, like refusing the lie detector, and more importantly, not even helping with the search, has further fueled speculation that he may be involved in some way. However, no concrete evidence links Dave to a crime, and he has no known criminal history. To date, Dave has never been charged or officially labeled a suspect in her disappearance. Another possibility is that Erin fell victim to an unknown person in the area. Erin was tall and fit, not someone who could be easily overpowered without a struggle, so any attacker might have relied on deception or a weapon. If she left the car to seek help or headed back toward the fair, she could have crossed paths with someone dangerous. The fair was crowded, and a predator could have seen an opportunity. Notably, there is at least one unconfirmed sighting of Erin at the fairgrounds again that evening, which, if true, suggests that the focus on Dave may have been unwarranted. It's conceivable she accepted help from a stranger, or was lured away by someone she knew and believed she could trust. Some have also wondered if an accident could explain her disappearance. Girdwood is surrounded by dense forest and rugged terrain, and if Erin wandered into the woods, she might have gotten lost or injured. That said, there's no evidence at all to indicate that she entered the woods, and there's no reason why she would do this anyway. Moreover, the search teams found absolutely no trace of her in the area, making this scenario less likely. Personally, I don't think this theory has any weight whatsoever, given what we know about her disappearance. And speaking of theories that shouldn't hold any weight, some have also questioned whether she just left and started a new life. There's absolutely zero evidence whatsoever to support this. Seriously, I feel like there's just one person out there that throws out this theory for every case, regardless of the facts every single time. As of now, the authorities are no closer to getting justice for Erin Gilbert than they were in 1995, and her case has become one of Alaska's most chilling unsolved mysteries. On a late spring evening in 2007, 18-year-old Angela Foxglove stepped out from her home in the remote village of Selawik, Alaska, and vanished without a trace. She had told people she planned to walk over 30 miles across open tundra to the neighboring village of Norvik to visit her boyfriend. It was a daunting journey. No roads connect the two settlements, only miles of wilderness, rivers, and wetlands. Angela left that night dressed in casual clothes, hardly ideal attire for a long trek. She never arrived in Norvik and has not been seen or heard from again since that night. Late May in northwest Alaska still brings extreme freezing temperatures after dark, lingering snowmelt, and swollen rivers from the spring thaw. As they say, when it's springtime in Alaska, it's 40 below. I'll just let that one sink in for a second. Anyone would be discouraged from walking between villages under such conditions due to the danger of hypothermia or getting lost, not to mention animal attacks. Why Angela was determined to set out alone remains unclear. Perhaps she underestimated the peril in her urgency to see her boyfriend, though, as I'll discuss, this seems unlikely. Whatever her reasons, she ventured into the Arctic wild that night and never reached her destination, if she did in fact head where she was claiming. When Angela failed to show up in Norvik or return home the next day, her family grew alarmed. Alaska State Troopers opened a case by May 25, 2007, treating her case as an endangered missing persons investigation from the start. Volunteers from Selawik joined troopers in scouring the vast area between the two villages, searching by foot, boat, and air. Unfortunately, nothing was found, though given the distances involved, and the question of whether she actually undertook this journey, this may not be surprising. The investigation into Angela's disappearance continued quietly in the background. The cops interviewed residents in both Selawik and Norvik, hoping to piece together her last movements. Unfortunately, this is where we run into a bit of a wall, since there's been very little information released on this case. However, there are some details known. They confirmed that Angela never reached Norvik. Her boyfriend there never saw her that following morning, which meant whatever happened likely occurred in or near Selawik. No suspects or persons of interest were ever publicly identified, but the possibility of foul play most definitely wasn't ruled out. In 2022, a renewed focus arrived with the state's new initiative into missing and slain Indigenous people, particularly of young women and girls. Under this initiative, a task force was set up to take these crimes much more seriously and solve as many cold cases as possible. According to a 2022 article about the establishment of this investigative unit, Angela's case was made a top priority. As yet, though, this doesn't appear to have led to a breakthrough or really any new evidence being uncovered whatsoever. In the absence of evidence, several theories have emerged about Angela's fate. One possibility is that she did attempt the treacherous trek to Norvik and fell victim to the unforgiving environment. The terrain between the villages is largely empty wilderness dotted with bogs and cut by icy rivers. If Angela became lost or exhausted, exposure to near-freezing temperatures could have quickly led to hypothermia. A misstep into a frigid, fast-moving river during the spring thaw could have been fatal as well. In such a scenario, her remains might have been swept away by currents or concealed in remote wetlands, which would explain why extensive searches found nothing. Alaska's wilderness also harbors dangerous predators like bears. The Arctic is vast and harsh, and it's conceivable that a lone, well-prepared traveler could perish without a trace. Angela was unfortunately the opposite of well-prepared, despite having lived in the Arctic her entire life, which leads to the next theory, which I personally subscribe to. This theory is, of course, that foul play was involved, and some believe that Angela never actually left Selawik on her own. They believe she may have crossed paths with someone that night who intended to do her harm. The fact that not a single piece of evidence was found despite the thorough search lends weight to this idea. It's possible a perpetrator could have hidden any signs of a struggle and disposed of her body in that same vast wilderness that she may have disappeared into. The idea that Angela intended to walk 10 miles through Alaskan wilderness in the evening makes little sense when examined realistically. Angela wasn't dressed or equipped for such a journey. She wore casual clothing and carried no supplies, light source, or winter gear. The trip would have required numerous hours of continuous walking across open wilderness as daylight faded, which would be extremely dangerous for anyone. The sheer impracticality of the plan strongly suggests that she either never intended to make that trip, or something stopped her long before she could. That said, We don't have any idea about why she wanted to undertake this journey so urgently, which means she may have been facing an even greater danger where she was. If she was facing some issue in her own community, this apparently irrational journey may have actually been a last resort to escape whatever threat she was facing. Hey everyone, Jimmy here reminding you to like and subscribe and tap the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to hit that join button or follow the Patreon link if you want to toss a clam or two my way or get your name up on the shout-out screen. On the crisp autumn afternoon of October 1st, 1919, America turned its gaze to Cincinnati's Redland Field. The World Series was set to begin, pitting the powerhouse Chicago White Sox, a team some considered among the greatest ever assembled, against the underdog Cincinnati Reds. The White Sox were such overwhelming favorites that finding anyone willing to bet against them was a fool's errand. On the mound for Chicago stood Eddie Cicotte, the team's ace, a brilliant pitcher coming off a spectacular season. His first pitch of the series was a clean strike. The crowd roared. Everything felt right. His second pitch, however, was different. It sailed inside and struck Reds leadoff hitter Maury Rath squarely in the back. To the tens of thousands watching, it was just an erratic pitch, a shaky start for the veteran. But for a handful of men scattered across the country, the gamblers who had quietly placed $10,000 in cash under Cicotte's hotel room pillow, it was the unmistakable signal. The fix was on. In that single, deliberate act of contrived incompetence, the sacred trust between player and fan was broken. It was the moment a simple game of baseball became something much darker, a conspiracy, a swindle, and what would forever be known as baseball's original sin. To understand how a team so dominant could agree to sell its soul, one must first understand the world they inhabited. The popular narrative, immortalized in books and films, paints a simple picture of victimhood. It casts White Sox owner Charles Comiskey as a notorious miser whose penny-pinching ways drove his underpaid superstars to desperation. Recent historical analysis of salary data from the era reveals a far more complex reality. The 1919 Chicago White Sox weren't a band of beleaguered paupers working for pennies. They had the third highest team payroll in the American League, and when accounting for bonuses, likely the highest in all of baseball. Their payroll was substantially larger than that of their World Series opponents. The stars were earning salaries many times that of the average American worker in a time when there were few opportunities to be a professional sportsman. The real source of player resentment wasn't their paychecks, but their powerlessness. Baseball's draconian reserve clause effectively bound a player to one team for their entire career, stripping them of any bargaining power. For example, Ty Cobb couldn't sign with another club unless Detroit traded or released him. He simply had zero agency in the matter. Simply put, baseball players were highly paid assets, but assets nonetheless, unable to test their value on an open market. This systemic lack of agency fostered a deep-seated cynicism toward owners like Comiskey, who became symbols of this absolute control. This frustration simmered in a culture where the lines between baseball and betting were almost non-existent. Fans openly placed bets in the grandstands on everything from the final score to what the result of the next pitch would be. Players themselves frequently bet on games, and their casual association with gamblers blurred ethical boundaries, and the earliest match-fixing scandals went back decades. Contrary to the myth of predatory gamblers luring innocent players into a trap, the plot to throw the 1919 World Series was born from within the White Sox clubhouse. The consensus among historians is that the players themselves were the instigators. The undisputed ringleader was first baseman Chick Gandil, a tough, hard-nosed player with deep connections to the gambling underworld. Alongside ace pitcher Eddie Saccott, who was reportedly worried about his financial future and his aging arm, Gandil hatched the scheme. He approached his underworld contacts with a stunning proposal. The World Series was for sale. Gandil and Saccott became the architects, recruiting teammates from their faction within the divided locker room. They brought in key players like pitcher Lefty Williams and shortstop Charles Risberg. Oscar Felsch and third baseman Buck Weaver were present at the meetings, though Weaver would insist he wanted no part of the final deal. Others would find other ways to enter into the conspiracy. For instance, utility infielder Fred McMullen wasn't even invited. In a move out of Crusader Kings, he forced his way into the plot after overhearing the conspirators and threatening to expose them if he wasn't given a cut. The involvement of the team's biggest star is one of the biggest mysteries surrounding this scandal. The extent of Shoeless Joe Jackson's part in the plot remains the most hotly debated piece of the puzzle to this day. He admitted to taking money to fix the game, but then double-crossed the gamblers and went out and tried his best. His performance during the World Series was absolutely stellar, leading many modern scholars to believe he was running a grift on the scammers. Basically, he put on a world-class game of baseball over the course of 8 games, despite accepting a fat stack of bills to be in on the fix. The conspiracy was messy from the start, involving at least 2 separate and competing syndicates of gamblers. Gandil's primary contact was Boston bookie Joseph Sullivan. Simultaneously, a former ballplayer named Bill Burns and his partner Billy Maharg were organizing their own financing. Both groups quickly realized they needed a massive bankroll to pay the players their promised $100,000 fee. That led them all to one man, Arnold Rothstein, the most powerful and notorious underworld financier in New York. Rothstein was a criminal mastermind, the inspiration for fictional characters like Meyer Wolfsheim in The Great Gatsby. He initially turned down the offer but was eventually persuaded, likely seeing an opportunity for a foolproof score. Rothstein, however, was far too clever to deal with the players directly. He operated through layers of insulation, using associates as intermediaries. This calculated distance ensured that while he would profit immensely from the fix, his name would never be directly tied to the dirty work. When the scheme eventually imploded, this structure allowed Rothstein to walk away untouched, while the players took the fall. The exact level of involvement of this underworld kingpin remains a matter of debate, given how adept he was at covering his tracks, and how tightly his lips were sealed. Notably, less than a decade later, while Arnold Rothstein was laying on his deathbed after being attacked, he famously told the cops his dad shot him. For clarity's sake, for those unfamiliar with the story, his dad definitely didn't do it. The fix began to unravel almost as soon as it started. After Eddie Saccott's signal in Game 1, he proceeded to pitch abysmally. In Game 2, Lefty Williams took the mound and issued a series of suspicious walks in the 4th inning, leading to a 4-2 Reds victory. The players had delivered 2 losses as promised, but when it came time to collect, the gamblers reneged. Of the $40,000 they were owed, they received only a single payment of $10,000, which Gandil split among the conspirators. The trust between the cheaters was immediately broken. The plan descended into chaos. In Game 3, in a surprise move, a rookie pitcher who wasn't in on the fix took the mound for Chicago, leading to a White Sox victory. The gamblers were furious, and the players were divided. The fix was back on for Games 4 and 5 with more suspicious plays, and the Reds won both games, taking a commanding 4-1 lead in the best-of-9 series. By this point, the players were enraged. They had been repeatedly shorted on their payments and felt they were being double-crossed. In a stunning turn, they decided to double-cross the gamblers back. Playing with renewed fire, and also playing with fire, The White Sox won games 6 and 7, suddenly pulling the series to a tense 4-3. The gamblers, who had millions riding on a Cincinnati victory, were panicked. Before the pivotal Game 8, they reasserted their control. According to some theories, the mob sent out some heavies not to threaten the ball players, but their wives. Whatever the truth of what happened, the Reds crushed the White Sox in Game 8, and the Cincinnati Reds won their tainted championship. For nearly a year, the scandal remained an open secret, a swirl of rumors that dogged the White Sox throughout the 1920 season. Sports writers refused to let the story go, relentlessly questioning the legitimacy of the 1919 series due to the highly irregular performances of the White Sox players. Their persistence finally forced the hand of the authorities, and in September 1920, a Cook County grand jury was convened to investigate gambling in baseball. The conspiracy quickly unraveled with a number of the men turning on each other. Thankfully, this occurred in Chicago in the early part of the 20th century, so there would be no corruption whatsoever to follow. The subsequent trial in the summer of 1921 was, by all accounts, as conventional as the 1919 World Series itself. The prosecution's most crucial evidence, the signed confessions of 3 of the players, had mysteriously vanished from the courthouse files. Years later, they would reportedly reappear in the possession of Comiskey's personal lawyer. What a strange coincidence, right? Truly baffling. Without the confessions, and with key witnesses recanting, the state's case fell apart. The jury, seemingly enamored with the celebrity athletes before them, took less than 3 hours to acquit all defendants on all charges on August 2nd, 1921. The players were carried from the courtroom on the shoulders of jubilant fans. Their celebration lasted less than 24 hours. The verdict had terrified baseball's owners, who saw the public's faith in their product evaporating. To save the game, they had already made a radical move, hiring federal judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis as baseball's first ever commissioner and granting him absolute power. The day after the acquittal, Landis issued a statement that would change American sports forever. He declared that the jury's verdict was irrelevant, and he invoked his absolute authority to protect the integrity of the game. The 8 men involved in the Black Sox scandal were banned for life, though in a bizarre turn of events, in 2025 the decision was reversed. Shoeless Joe Jackson, who would be almost 150 years old now, is once again eligible to play ball. On a warm night in early August 2006, a black Pontiac Grand Prix sat abandoned along an East Texas highway near Longview, its driver nowhere in sight. The car's door was left ajar and the keys were missing, but there were no footprints, only an eerie absence. It belonged to 23-year-old Brandy Wells, who had vanished days earlier after an uncharacteristic night out alone. The unsettling discovery of Brandy's vehicle, out of gas on the roadside just shy of an exit, marked the start of a haunting mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Brandy had recently moved back to East Texas to enroll in community college and was about to start a new job, hoping to fulfill her dream of becoming a teacher. On the evening of August 2nd, 2006, she decided to celebrate with a night at Graham Central Station, a popular nightclub in Longview. When her sister and friends couldn't join her, Brandy went to the club alone. Tragically, she never made it home. Brandy arrived at the club around 10:30 that evening, after getting lost and calling for directions. By then, her gas tank was nearly empty, and witnesses recall that she asked other patrons for a few dollars of gas money at the club. Surveillance footage later showed Brandy leaving around 12:30 a.m. by herself. Club staff noted she had only 1 or 2 drinks and didn't appear intoxicated when she walked out. That said, of course, they have an incentive to say that the woman who was walking around asking for gas money seemed sober, because of the potential civil liability implications. Those early morning hours of August 3rd, 2006, were the last time anyone saw Brandy Wells alive. When Brandy didn't come home the next day, her mother reported her missing on August 4th. On August 6th, a passing motorist noticed an abandoned black Pontiac Grand Prix on the shoulder of Interstate 20 outside Longview and called it in. It turned out to be Brandy's car. Police searched around the vehicle with sniffer dogs and officers on foot, but found no trace of Brandy or any sign of a struggle. Inside the car, they discovered a drink napkin with a man's name and phone number scribbled on it. Investigators traced the name to a man who admitted he'd met Brandy at the club that night. He said he offered to buy her a drink, but Brandy had only asked for gas money before they parted ways. After confirming his story, police cleared this individual of any involvement. The napkin lead ultimately went nowhere, leaving the abandoned car as the only piece of physical evidence. Despite extensive official and volunteer searches in the area, no further trace of Brandy was found at all in the weeks following her disappearance. Brandy's Pontiac was left in a way that raised many questions. It was parked at an odd angle about 400 yards from the highway exit she would have taken toward her mother's home. The car had run completely out of gas, and a plastic fuel can was found in the trunk, one that Brandy's family says she never carried. Brandy's purse and wallet were still inside the vehicle, suggesting robbery wasn't the motive. There was also an older cell phone in the car that turned out to belong to her ex-boyfriend, rather than to Brandy. Notably, the driver's seat was pushed far back, too far for 5-foot Brandy to have been the last person to drive the car. This detail hinted that someone taller had likely driven the Pontiac to that spot on I-20. About 9 days after Brandy disappeared, a flurry of activity appeared on her cell phone account, suggesting someone had found her phone and was using it. Investigators traced the usage to 3 people in the Longview area who had possession of the phone during that period. The individuals claimed they discovered Brandy's phone discarded on a roadside not far from where her car had been found. All 3 were given polygraph exams. The first 2 passed, but the third man gave inconsistent accounts of finding the phone and failed his lie detector test. His behavior raised suspicion, but police didn't have enough evidence to name him or anyone else as a suspect. Notably, the area where Brandy's phone changed hands was known for substance usage and trafficking activity. This fueled speculation that she might have been picked up by an organized criminal ring who whisked her away to another location. Given the distinct lack of evidence in this case, there have been numerous theories and speculation to try to fit whatever evidence does exist into a cohesive narrative. One possibility is that Brandy was attacked by a stranger after leaving the club. The pushed-back driver's seat and the way her car was abandoned suggest a taller person may have driven it after she vanished. A carjacking or abduction could have occurred either in the nightclub parking lot or as she drove along the highway toward home. Under this theory, it's possible that this person may have broken into her vehicle and hid in the rear area until she started driving. At that point, he may have taken control of her and the vehicle and ultimately abducted her. Another theory is that Brandy ran out of gas on the highway and fell prey to a predator posing as a helpful motorist. In this scenario, Brandy may have willingly accepted assistance from someone who then harmed her once she was vulnerable on the roadside. However, this theory fails to fully account for the position of the seat or the jerry can found in the car. Brandy's family has voiced fears that she was targeted by traffickers, and the region where she disappeared was known to have problems with trafficking activity. However, no hard evidence has emerged to prove this theory, but it remains a disturbing possibility. Brandy Wells remains classified as an endangered missing person nearly 2 decades later. Brandy would be about 42 years old now, and her family still holds on to hope that someone, somewhere knows the truth of what happened that night in 2006. For millions of kids in the late 1990s, the world of Pokemon Red and Blue was a vibrant, cheerful adventure. It was a journey of friendship and discovery, painted in monochrome pixels and accompanied by an upbeat 8-bit soundtrack. But then, you arrived in Lavender Town. The cheerful music stopped. The colors muted to somber purple shades, the best the Game Boy could handle. The town wasn't a place of challenge or excitement. It was a giant cemetery, a place where characters spoke of loss and the spirits of departed Pokemon. And underneath it all was the music, a jarring, atonal, and deeply unsettling theme that felt utterly alien to the rest of the game. This sensory shift was so profound that it left a scar on a generation of players, creating a psychological foundation for one of the internet's most enduring ghost stories. Lavender Town Syndrome isn't just a simple hoax to be debunked. It's a complex cultural artifact that reveals how digital folklore is born and how collective anxiety can morph into an accepted narrative. From there, it can, in essence, become functionally real, as adults who played subsequently quote-unquote remember suffering from this strange condition back in the day. The story first appeared on the internet around 2010, appearing on anonymous forums like 4chan. It was presented as a dark, forgotten chapter of video game history. The core narrative was chillingly specific. Shortly after the 1996 release of Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, a wave of unexplained illnesses swept through children. Also, as I was editing, I realized that this wording may be somewhat confusing. Pokemon Green was changed to Pokemon Blue for the North American release. The alleged symptoms began with headaches, nosebleeds, and severe irritability, but soon escalated into violent outbursts. In the darkest twist, over 100 children would choose to jump from the top of their apartment buildings. The story provided a culprit, the original, unaltered theme music for Lavender Town. According to the legend, this version of the track contained a combination of high-frequency tones and binaural beats that were inaudible to adults. However, these same beats were damaging to the developing ears and minds of children. To make the tale more convincing, it claimed that a distraught Nintendo employee had leaked an internal report that officially named the phenomenon Lavender Town Syndrome. The anonymous, collaborative nature of the internet acted as an incubator for the legend. Users began adding layers of fabricated evidence to make the story more believable. Doctored spectrograms of the audio track appeared, claiming to show hidden images of ghost Pokemon. American, Canadian, and Western European users began to post their own weird experiences they remembered from childhood. While the initial posters were likely in on the joke, so to speak, when it went viral, it's believed that some people began to believe they may have actually suffered from this. The central claim of the legend, the event among Japanese children in 1996, is demonstrably false. A review of public health records and historical health statistics from Japan reveals no such spike. Notably, there are no credible media reports, police records, or official statements from Nintendo from that period that even hint at such a catastrophe. However, the legend's incredible staying power isn't rooted in pure fiction. It's anchored to a real, widely reported, and genuinely frightening event known as the Pokemon Shock. On December 16, 1997, an episode of the Pokemon anime titled Electric Soldier Porygon aired in Japan. 20 minutes into the episode, a scene depicted an explosion using rapid, alternating red and blue strobe lights, flashing at a frequency of about 12 Hz. The effect was devastating. The intense visual stimulus triggered photosensitive epileptic seizures in hundreds of viewers across the country. Official reports confirmed that 685 children were taken to hospitals by ambulance, suffering from convulsions, temporary blindness, and loss of consciousness. Thousands more reported milder symptoms like dizziness and nausea. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The episode was banned, and the anime was pulled from Japanese airwaves for a 4-month hiatus. This very real incident cemented a powerful idea in the public consciousness. Pokemon media could, under the right circumstances, cause real, widespread physical harm to children. This event was widely reported in North American video game magazines in the 90s, creating the hazy memories of these effects in the minds of the young readers. Even without the legend, the Lavender Town theme is genuinely unnerving, a masterpiece of musical unease composed by Junichi Masuda. Using the limited 4-channel sound of the original Game Boy, the track creates a jarring soundscape. Music theory analysis reveals a composition filled with dissonance, atonal notes, and the use of the tritone. It's an interval so unsettling it was historically dubbed Diabolus in Musica, or the Devil in Music. A high-pitched, repetitive 4-note sequence clashes with the underlying harmony, creating a disorienting and stressful auditory experience. In essence, this piece of music is intentionally designed to make the player feel anxious and out of place. Lavender Town Syndrome is a quintessential creepypasta, a term born from the internet slang copypasta, which describes blocks of text copied and pasted across forums. If you're not familiar with the term creepypasta, you're almost certainly familiar with Slender Man, a creepypasta which was born on the then highly influential Something Awful forum. These stories are the digital age's campfire tales, often anonymous, told from a first-person perspective, and designed to blur the line between fiction and reality. The genre's popularity peaked around 2010, precisely when the Lavender Town story went viral. Ultimately, the enduring power of Lavender Town Syndrome lies in its masterful manipulation of nostalgia. Nostalgia is a deeply unifying emotion, connecting us to our past and reinforcing our sense of self. For an entire generation, Pokemon is a cornerstone of that nostalgic identity, representing a time of perceived innocence and safety. Horror as a genre thrives on violating such safe spaces, twisting symbols from childhood like animatronics, stuffed animals, or clowns into sources of terror. The Lavender Town creepypasta infects this pristine memory from childhood when the player arrived in a jarring location in an otherwise cozy, comfy video game. The most interesting mystery, however, is why people who likely didn't experience any of the symptoms associated with the creepypasta later remember that they did. "13-year-old Russell Evans was a popular 8th grader in Spokane, Washington, known for his love of basketball and friendly personality. On the night of June 3rd, 1989, he spent time hanging out with friends at a local park in Spokane's South Hill neighborhood. In the early hours of June 4th, Russell was found gravely injured on a residential roadway near his home after what appeared to be a hit-and-run incident. He was barely conscious and repeatedly calling out the name Brian as passers-by quickly rushed to assist him. Russell was taken to Sacred Heart Hospital around 1:30 a.m., but despite emergency surgery and hours of effort, he succumbed to his injuries later that morning. His unexplained death would spark a years-long quest for answers. On June 3rd, 1989, a few hours before the tragedy, Russell and his best friend Aaron were at Thornton Murphy Park, enjoying a typical weekend evening. The mood shifted when two older teenagers, unfamiliar to Russell and Aaron, approached and began harassing Aaron's girlfriend, allegedly trying to give her a phone number. An argument erupted, nearly turning physical until Russell intervened to defend his friend. And one thing about Russell you should know is that despite being 13 years old, he already stood 6'3", so he was no easy target for these older teens. One of the older teens issued a parting threat as they left, warning that he might, quote, send his homeboys after Russell and Aaron. One of the teens even shouted further violent threats before driving off, strongly implying that said homeboys weren't looking to throw down in accordance with Queensberry rules. Unsettled, Russell and his friends decided to leave the park. Russell spent the next few hours at another friend's house to cool off. Just after midnight, at about 12:30 a.m. on June 4th, he phoned his father to say he was on his way home. Russell began the short walk home through the quiet neighborhood. Along the way, he ran into a friend, 14-year-old Syed Madison, and the two chatted briefly before parting. Madison would be the last person confirmed to see Russell alive. Around 1 a.m., a driver named Sandy Ferris and her friend were coming down South Thor Street when her headlights caught a shocking sight: Russell's body lying in the road near the median. Sandy stopped and rushed to help. She found Russell badly injured but conscious. When she asked what happened, he was in pain and kept calling for someone named Brian. She believed that he was calling out to Brian, believing that he would come to his rescue. Also keep the name Brian in mind because we're going to come back to him shortly. Sandy immediately called for an ambulance, and paramedics arrived and noted Russell's severe injuries, which were apparently consistent with a vehicle impact. Notably, the paramedics found that Russell wasn't wearing any shoes, something which will become a point of contention. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Tragically, despite doctors' efforts through the night, Russell succumbed to severe internal injuries on the morning of June 4th, 1989. Investigators from the Spokane Police Department treated the case as a fatal hit-and-run accident from the start. Physical evidence at the scene strongly supported the possibility of a car strike. Russell's shoes had been knocked off his feet by the force of impact and were found about 75 feet away from where his body came to rest. The Spokane authorities explained that upon impact, his shoes likely flew from his body, an explanation that many amateurs and professionals have found dubious at best. Notably, the forensic pathologist examined the injuries and concluded they were consistent with being struck from behind by a vehicle bumper. Investigators even speculated about the type of vehicle, suggesting an unknown driver, possibly in a pickup truck given Russell's height and the wound locations, hit him and fled the scene. Because Russell had been involved in a dispute earlier that night, police questioned the two teens from the park altercation to rule out any deliberate attack. Both teens denied any involvement or being in a gang, and each passed a lie detector test. By the end of that first week, authorities publicly ruled out their involvement in Russell's death. With no eyewitness to the collision and no immediate suspects, the working theory remained that Russell was the victim of an unknown hit-and-run driver unconnected to the night's events. Unsatisfied with the initial conclusions, the Evans family launched their own investigation. After reviewing the police reports and scene photographs, John and Sue Evans became convinced that Russell had been attacked before any car ever hit him. They noted that Russell's injuries looked more like the result of a physical altercation. He had bruises on his face and arms that looked consistent with an assault, as if someone had grabbed and punched him. Strikingly, he lacked the deep scrapes or road rash one would expect if a body his size had been hurled across pavement at high speed. Fortunately, his family had the means to hire a second pathologist to review the case, because if they weren't able to do this, this is likely where the investigation would have ground to a halt. This expert agreed that there were signs Russell had been in a physical altercation prior to his death, noting bruised knuckles and unexplained trauma on his back. This pathologist agreed that a vehicle impact occurred at some point, but also concluded Russell fought for his life that night. Given the lack of road rash on Russell's body, the family, with the assistance of the pathologist, came up with an alternative theory. They believed that Russell was ambushed and beaten while walking home, then held in place and struck with a vehicle to make the whole event look like a much more routine hit and run. The mysterious Brian, whom Russell cried out for, also became a focus of inquiry. It turns out Brian was a close friend of Russell's who lived nearby. Curiously, on the night of the supposed hit and run, someone named Brian had called the hospital asking about Russell's condition very soon after the incident. Russell's family found this suspicious, given that no one could have known that he was in the emergency room at that hour unless they were at the scene. Sandy Ferris, the motorist who found Russell, reported that as police arrived, she saw a teenage boy in white shorts lurking on a hillside near the site, who then ran off into the darkness. She immediately told an officer, but in the chaos, the information was not pursued at the time. John Evans, Russell's dad, confronted Russell's friend Brian the next day, asking what he had been wearing that night. Brian allegedly said he'd worn white shorts and a white t-shirt, matching the figure Sandy saw, but swore he wasn't in the area when Russell was hit. Later, when police interviewed Brian, he oddly denied even owning white shorts. These inconsistencies fueled the family's suspicions that Brian knew more than he was admitting. Some have speculated Brian may have been with Russell during the attack, but was scared into silence by the perpetrators. The police, however, disagreed and believed that the person Sandy Ferris saw was likely a random bystander drawn to the area by the commotion. To this day, the exact role, if any, of Brian in Russell's last moments remains an open question. By late 1989, despite the Evans family's pleas, Spokane police maintained there was insufficient proof of foul play, and the case began to turn cold. In 1996, John and Sue Evans hired a private investigator to re-examine the case, and this spurred new witnesses to come forward with some disturbing accounts. Now, I should mention here that these statements are based largely upon what these individuals heard other people saying these gang members said. Yeah, so not the most reliable form of evidence, and I don't put incredible evidentiary weight on it, but it's something. According to statements collected by the investigator, local gang members had bragged about assaulting Russell with a club and then running him over with a car. The statements also suggest the group discussed creating an alibi and threatening anyone who knew the truth into keeping quiet. Based on these leads, the Evans family identified specific individuals they believed were responsible, and even a vehicle that might have been used in the crime. Despite these revelations, law enforcement's stance barely shifted. Spokane police said they did investigate the new tips, but in their view, the evidence still wasn't strong enough to overcome the original accident ruling. According to them, the teens implicated by the witnesses had already been cleared earlier, and prosecutors declined to file any charges without direct proof. Anyway, the Russell Evans case really doesn't sit right with me. There are too many inconsistencies, too many details that don't line up with a simple hit and run. Even if the truth can't be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, it's fairly clear that something more sinister than a simple hit and run happened that night. Unfortunately, given the passage of time and given the way the investigation was handled, I find it difficult to believe that the truth will ever be fully known for Russell's case. Imagine you're a medieval explorer standing on the edge of the known world. In the 15th century, for a Portuguese mariner sailing west from Lisbon, that edge was a terrifying, empty expanse of gray-blue Atlantic water. But out in that void, some 1,000 miles from the European coast, a miracle of geology had punched through the ocean's surface. A tiny cluster of 9 volcanic islands, the Azores, lay scattered across the seam, where 3 of Earth's tectonic plates grind together. The smallest, northernmost, and most remote of them all was Corvo, and this island would harbor a startling secret. Corvo isn't so much an island as it is the jagged crown of a single colossal submarine volcano named Monte Gordo, a lonely outpost on the North American plate. It's a place of profound isolation, a mere 7 square miles of rock and pasture that today is home to just over 400 souls. This is a place built by fire and water, seemingly untouched by human hands. And that is precisely why the first Portuguese explorers, upon making landfall here in the mid-15th century, were confronted with an impossibility. On this desolate, windswept island, which all logic dictated should be empty, they found something that defied every expectation. It was a sophisticated work of art, an equestrian statue, carved from stone, its silent rider gazing resolutely west, pointing toward the vast, terrifying unknown that lay beyond the horizon. This enigmatic entity would come to be known as the Horseman of Corvo. The story of the statue could have easily dissolved into the mists of maritime folklore were it not for one man, Damião de Goss. Goss was no mere spinner of yarns. He was a respected humanist, a well-traveled diplomat, and crucially, the head archivist of the Portuguese Royal Archives. His word carried immense weight, and when he included the statue in his 1567 Chronicle of Prince John, he wasn't recording rumor, but what he believed to be fact. His account is striking for its journalistic specificity. He describes a statue carved from a single slab of stone, depicting a man on horseback. The rider wore a cloak. His left hand rested calmly on the horse's mane, while his right arm was extended, pointing westward. Notably, the clothing the man was wearing was described as North African in nature, which to the Portuguese of the time suggested a Carthaginian origin, or perhaps a later Moorish origin. Below the statue, etched into the stone base, were letters from an alphabet none of the sailors recognized. Goss even recorded a later attempt to decipher this script, adding further weight to this tale. In 1529, a sea captain named Pero da Fonseca was told by locals that men had attempted to press wax against the inscription and send it back to the mainland for scholarly analysis. However, this was unsuccessful, as the inscription was long faded from the elements. Goss placed the monument on the northwestern side of Corvo's mountain, in a location he explicitly states was dangerous and difficult to access. This level of detail is compelling, and it doesn't read like a myth, which tends to be fluid and vague. Rather, it reads like a report. The precision of the description, the clothing, the exact posture, and the specific gesture suggests Goss was working from a source he trusted. The very inclusion of such mundane details gives the extraordinary claim the potential ring of authenticity. The very mundanity of the details, especially the frustrating and failed attempts to understand the inscription, gives the extraordinary claim a powerful and unsettling ring of authenticity. The discovery of such an anomaly at the edge of the known world did not go unnoticed. The news reached the court of King Manuel I. Manuel was a man obsessed with legacy, and he was a great patron of the arts and architecture. He was also the sponsor of the great voyages of discovery, and the wealth of empire flowed into his coffers, making him one of the richest monarchs in Europe. For such a king, an ancient statue like this was something that could either challenge or amplify Portugal's own exploratory achievements. If it was placed there by Moorish sailors, it would make the Portuguese find much less impressive, as they were able to do it with similar technology. But if it was carved by the legendary sailors of Carthage, according to the logic of the time, this was more of a transfer of the mantle of exploratory supremacy than anything else. The Carthaginians were then, as they are known today, considered amongst the foremost mariners in world history, and it would have been no shame to be beaten anywhere by them. The king first dispatched a royal draftsman, Duarte de Armas, to create a detailed sketch of the monument. This was an act of documentation, a desire to understand the object before sending a full expedition to retrieve it. Tragically, that desire to possess would be the monument's undoing if the sources are to be believed. After viewing the drawing, which has since been lost to history, King Manuel ordered the statue to be brought to Lisbon. An engineer from Porto, who had been trained in Italy and was considered the best at his trade, was sent with equipment to retrieve the artifact. Unfortunately, this Italian-trained engineer turned the mission into a complete catastrophe. The official report that returned to the king blamed a fierce winter storm for having shattered the statue. But Goss, ever the diligent historian, records a crucial and telling detail, which suggests that the engineer and his workers broke it through clumsiness. Only a few pathetic fragments, the heads of the man and the horse, a right arm, a piece of a leg, were salvaged and brought to Lisbon. They were reportedly kept in royal possession for a time before they vanished completely, leaving nothing behind but a story. In the centuries following the Horsemen of Corvo incident, Portugal's golden age would rapidly fade, and this maritime empire would hit some choppy waters. The story faded into history and had become a largely forgotten mystery. But in 1749, a new piece of the puzzle emerged, unearthed by a storm, and this would potentially support an ancient origin for this enigmatic statue. The tempest scoured the island's coast, uncovering the foundations of a ruined building, and within it, a black pottery vessel, and inside the pot was a hoard of coins. These coins eventually made their way to an academic who identified them as Carthaginian and Greek, and dated them to approximately 200 BC. Suddenly, the statue legend had what it always lacked: potential physical evidence that corroborated the story. The coin find seemed to potentially place sailors from the Carthaginian Empire on that very island at a plausible time. This Carthaginian hypothesis gained academic traction as they were known to depict their gods as horsemen. Furthermore, equestrian statues of the type described by Goss were popular in the Hellenistic period, which perfectly matched the date of the coins. The theory was exciting. The statue was a religious monument, or a territorial marker, left by ancient mariners who had pushed far out into the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. Unfortunately, however, these coins, like seemingly everything in this mysterious historical story, have been lost to time as well. Further, later modern discoveries would suggest that Vikings may have ventured to the island around the 9th century. It remains a distinct possibility that these Norsemen could have dumped off their glistening booty on the island, which was then lost to time. Of course, for every romantic theory, there's a skeptical counterargument. The most straightforward is that the statue never existed as a man-made object at all. Corvo is a volcanic island, littered with dramatic basalt formations. Skeptics argue that the so-called statue was likely a natural rock formation that, when viewed from a distance at sea, had the superficial appearance of a horse and rider. To a 15th century sailor, steeped in a world of myth and marvels, it's easy to imagine how such a geological curiosity could be interpreted as a deliberate sculpture. From there, as the island, which was previously completely uninhabited, was settled, the locals may have simply accepted this initial finding. Notably, some scholars have pointed to maps at the time which included figures with outstretched arms around the approximate location of the Azores. These were included not as legitimate markers, but as a "here be dragons" point on the map. It's been speculated that the initial report of seeing this figure was the mariners' way of saying they had reached the spot on the map with the outstretched arm. The theory suggests that this abstract symbol on a map may have been misinterpreted over the years, until chroniclers believed it represented a real, physical statue on an island. In this view, the legend was born not on the rocky cliffs of Corvo, but on the vellum of a cartographer's workshop, and over time, a rock structure was associated with the statue. For most of modern history, the debate remained at this impasse, and this is where we are right now. On one side was the highly credible, detailed account from a respected chronicler, which some scholars insist cannot be simply dismissed as a fairy tale. On the other was the complete and utter lack of any direct archaeological proof. Without the statue, the inscription, or even the drawing or the coins, most mainstream historians filed the story under unproven legend.